While horror movies provide a thrilling, adrenaline-filled experience right from the comfort of our couches, some films in the genre outshine the others by a mile, with their realistic depictions of seemingly true events. In fact, fear creeps into the human psyche only when we realize that there is something at stake. And knowing that these horror incidents are true lived experiences of others just like us only makes the entire movie watching experience more terrifying and eerie. Today I will be adding to this by taking you through some of the top horror films based on terrifying true events. So be warned, this video is not for the faint-hearted. Angst, 1983. Starting off strong, the 1983 Austrian psychological horror Angst was based on the cold-blooded murders committed by serial killer Werner Niesek. Directed by Gerald Cargill, this film began with the psychopathic killer's release from prison and eventual descent into his past murderous life as he craves the look of fear in his victims' eyes right before he kills them. With a gory premise and a disturbing true story attached to it, Angst was banned upon release across several European countries. But those who had been eager to watch it on the screen surely remember the bone-chilling unleashed frame by frame as Niesek creeps up on his victims and kills them in gruesome ways. From attacking mentally impaired victims to even using a range of methods from drowning victims in bathtubs to stabbing them and drinking their blood before regurgitating all over their corpses, Niesek's crimes know no bounds. In fact, some have even said that the deepest pits of hell are not enough punishment for such a psychopathic killer, while the film's climax reveals that his descent into madness and sadistic killings were a direct result of his own unstable childhood. In this way, the film does make an attempt to explain why one might ever be driven to commit such unimaginable crimes. And director Gerald Cargill has also talked about how he created this film because he wanted to do something dramatic that dealt with fundamental human matters. To make it all worse, it is worth noting that the film's inspiration, Niesek, had actually been granted a temporary leave from prison in the weeks leading up to his final release, and how he had taken that chance to wipe out a family of 3. All of this sounds insane and served as the perfect basis for a dramatic film with a psychological reasoning attached to it, making it the perfect watch for those who enjoy delving into matters such as sadism, childhood traumas and their consequences, and the overall human psyche. The Golden Glove, 2019. Now that I've kicked off with a killer-inspired horror, it would be criminal to ignore another gem in the genre, The Golden Glove. This 2019 biological horror was directed by Faith Akin and inspired by the crimes of German serial killer Fritz Honka, who was responsible for killing 4 women in the years between 1970 and 1975. If killing them was not enough, Honka had even gone as far as to hide their body parts in his apartment. And all of this began in 1970 when Honka worked as a night watchman with an alcoholism problem. After murdering a prostitute in his own apartment and disposing of some of her organs in a suitcase, he safely stored the remaining parts in a makeshift locker in his apartment wall, and managed to get away with the crime until eventually resurfacing in 1974. By this point, Fritz was infatuated by a schoolgirl, and had even taken to spending his time in a red light district pub. The Golden Glove, which is where he often picked up on his victims and lured them to safety to his home before exposing them to the same fate as the first woman. If this does not sound disturbing enough, I'd say that the gore isn't even the worst of the horrors, as Fritz even forces himself upon these unsuspecting girls and coerces them into performing sexual acts before claiming their lives. As far as horror films go, such graphic depictions of violence truly capture the depraved mind and brutalities of a serial killer, and many critics and fans alike have quoted The Golden Glove as one of the most vile serial killer movies ever. While this is just fiction, it is disturbing to think just how brutal it would have been for the actual victims of Honka's crimes, and Faith Akin does a spectacular job of bringing his heinous acts to the big screen for all of us to witness. Open Water, 2003. Moving away from man-made crimes to natural horrors, the 2003 American survivor horror Open Water was inspired by the horrifying disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. This incident took place in the Coral Sea off Australia's northeast coast on January 25, 1998, when the couple was on a scuba diving excursion on board the MV Outer Edge. Unfortunately, their adventure took a fatal turn when they never returned from their dive site at the Great Barrier Reef, and their disappearance was only noted about 2 days later when it was too late to save their lives. While some sources cited that they had disappeared on purpose, there was not much evidence for these rumors, and their bodies were unfortunately never recovered in this mystery. The film covers this entire ordeal in a rather dramatized retelling, wherein the couple is seen stranded at sea as they eventually become shark food amidst a fiery storm. Now, the film did end on a found footage trope where a fisherman cuts open a shark's stomach to unearth a diving camera that allegedly belonged to the couple, hinting that the film's footage was a real and true account of their sufferings. However, the film remains fiction and is only inspired by the real Lonergan's tragic disappearance. And if Jaws hadn't done enough of a job in evoking fear of open waters and deep seas, this film definitely amped up the terror to a whole new level. Backcountry. Now, not all nature-based horror stories end in death, and sometimes they might just serve as a fatal cautionary tale where all ends well. Such was the story of Mark Jordan and Jacqueline Perry's excursion, which inspired the 2014 film Backcountry, which follows the couple's chance encounter with a black bear in the depths of a campsite in Missinaba Provincial Park, Ontario. The incident began with the couple setting up camp when a gigantic bear appeared out of nowhere and dragged Jacqueline into the woods, while Mark bravely jumped in to confront the bear and stab it repeatedly until it released his wife. Thankfully, he managed to drag Jacqueline to safety with the injured animal close on their heels, and even though he had suffered serious injuries himself, Mark somehow pulled them both into their kayak and paddled safely to a nearby campsite for assistance. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Jacqueline did not survive the ordeal, but Mark lived to tell the tale and was even awarded Canada's Star of Courage for his attempt at saving her. The film also serves as a dramatized fictional retelling of the actual incident, while also tweaking certain instances such as Mark dying instead of Jacqueline. The film also switches up some plot points, such as the couple breaking an important rule of backpacking by leaving their cell phones and area maps behind. But at the end of the day, director MacDonald did a successful job of depicting the feeling of being lost in the wilderness. At some point, you might end up feeling like you have been lost along with the couple, and by the end of it, you'll definitely learn a lesson or two in respecting nature and realizing that it is much bigger than us humans. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, 1976. Coming up next, The Town That Dreaded Sundown drifts away from jungles and oceans and places itself in the heart of Miller County, and was loosely based on the unsolved Texarkana moonlight murders. Directed by Charles B. Pierce, the plot was set soon after World War II in Texarkana, wherein a hooded man known as the Phantom Killer had murdered around 8 people in the spring of 1946. While the original incident involved 5 deaths and 3 serious injuries, the killer managed to walk free after evading capture time and again, even if the film decided to portray things differently. For instance, the original murder victims' corpses were abandoned in secluded locations all over the place around the full moon, thereby inspiring the name Moonlight Murders, which even led to the film's title as The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Over time, the local newspaper, the Texarkana Gazette, dubbed the criminal the Phantom Killer due to his tendency to strike and vanish into thin air. And when Charles Pierce stepped up to bring this story to the big screen, it did not take long for the film to attain cult classic status. Even if the film notably steers away from the actual events, it managed to become one of the earliest and best slasher horrors out there, with film within the film tropes wherein the killer seemingly lurks at the movie's premiere to catch it on the screens out of curiosity over his own crime's depiction. What also helped was the film being marketed with the tagline that the killer still lurks the streets of Texarkana Ark, a bold move that was eventually edited out over lawsuit threats, but also added to the film's dedication towards curating a horror experience that did justice to the original tragic events. Borderland, 2007. While on the subject of tragic events, Borderland was a 2007 horror directed by Zev Berman, which was loosely based on the religious cult of drug lord Adolfo de Jesus Costanzo. Notoriously known for their practices in human sacrifices, Costanzo's club of Necro-Satanists first became popular for all the wrong reasons when they kidnapped and murdered Mark J. Kilroy, a junior at the University of Texas. The film begins with a fictionalized story of 2 policemen breaking and entering the cult's headquarters, where they witness all kinds of magical sigils, gruesome animal and human remnants, and Officer Ulysses even witnesses a traumatizing incident when his partner is captured and sacrificed by these cult members. In the following year, 3 Texas University grad students end up in this same town, where one of them falls victim to the cult, while the other 2 team up with Ulysses to get to the bottom of the cult's activities. They even end up finding their 3rd friend, Phil, who is being held captive at their headquarters, until they prepare him for sacrifice at the hands of their sadistic leader, Centillion. While the film ends with Ulysses capturing Centillion and even killing him, the ending also reveals that the cult's headquarters were home to kilograms of smuggled cocaine, in addition to human remnants and at least 50 corpses exhumed from a mass grave. And director Zev Berman has himself talked about his own experience tracking down the original college student disappearance before digging deep into the cult stories. He researched all the material with writing partner Eric Poppin, delving into all sorts of horrors linked to Constanzo's cult fanaticism to make this film as authentic a depiction of the original cult as possible. There is no doubt that all of this paid off, and Borderland came to life as not just a critical and commercial success, but also as a cult classic within the cult genre that continues to evoke stomach-churning responses from the audiences even today.
Where you going? Off to tell that stuck-up bitch of a murder of yours?
The Girl Next Door, 2007. Inspired by the real-life murder of Sylvia Likens in 1965, The Girl Next Door is a 2007 psychological horror thriller directed by Gregory M. Wilson and written by Daniel Ferrens. While the film in itself is inspired by Jack Ketchum's 1989 novel by the same name, the original source material can be traced to Sylvia's unfortunate torture and murder, and the plot is a dramatized retelling of the incident through the eyes of a teenage boy who witnesses Sylvia's increasing abuse while being held captive in a suburban house. Now, be warned, this film's depictions of cruelty and graphic violence are not for the faint-hearted, and it is chilling how the film's protagonist, Meg Laughlin, is tortured by her own aunt and often beaten, burned, starved, and even forced to watch her own sister being abused in front of her eyes. These disturbing attempts are often flagged by David Moran, who falls witness to this abuse and does his best to report it, unfortunately to no avail. Now, the film ends on a dramatic note where David himself intervenes and kills the aunt, while Meg also suffers from some fatal injuries and succumbs to them. And if this sounds bad, the original story is a lot worse. Sylvia Likens' torture at the hands of her caregiver, Gertrude Baniswetsky, went on for 3 months, wherein she suffered starvation, beating, sexual abuse, burn marks, and a lot more torture before she eventually died from injuries and malnourishment. And her autopsy showed at least 150 wounds all over her body. That being said, the film does a decent job of honoring her memory while also telling her story out loud, and for that alone, The Girl Next Door deserves a watch. The Exorcism of Emily Rose, 2005. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is just one of those supernatural horror films that everybody knows of, but very few fans know that this film was actually inspired by the real-life horrors witnessed by a young German woman, Anna Elisabeth Anneliese Michael. Her trauma started at the young age of 16, when she first experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis, and this first intervention was soon followed by many more diagnoses, including depression, epileptic psychosis, and bipolar disorder. When she had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital and had undergone treatment and taking medication, her condition only worsened with time, and by 20 she claimed to hear voices and spiraled at the mention of religious objects. Eventually, her family had no choice but to conclude that she was possessed by a demon, which then led them to approach the Catholic Church and appeal for an exorcism. This procedure, while disguised as a religious attempt at curing her, is what led to her eventual death, as she had entirely stopped consuming food and succumbed to malnourishment and dehydration after 67 such torturous exorcism sessions. While her parents and the priests involved were labeled guilty of negligent homicide, The Exorcism of Emily Rose loosely sought inspiration from this ordeal to create a film so terrifying that it went on to win Best Horror Film at the Saturn Awards, won several critics' praises, and has even solidified itself as one of the best religious horror movies of all time. Blackwater, 2007. Shifting focus to nature once again, Blackwater was a 2007 Australian-British horror written and directed by David Nerlich and Andrew Trelke. The film was set within the mangrove swamps of northern Australia and inspired by the real-life story of a crocodile attack. Fact. It involved 3 teenage boys that had targeted a pregnant woman, her boyfriend, and her sister while they were on a boat. While the film follows their journey as they take part in Blackwater Berry's fishing tour on a whim, the story introduces Grace as the pregnant lady on tour with her husband Adam and sister Lee as they watch the crocodile show. In no time, things go awry when their boat capsizes and the crocodile attacks them, and Adam is the first one to fall prey to this beast, while Grace survives for a little longer before eventually succumbing to her fatal injury. Lee is the only one to survive this ordeal and live with the grief of losing her sister and brother-in-law, and the film does a spectacular job of bringing the terror to life, as they even shot footage of real saltwater crocodiles to make the experience as authentic as possible. While the events in the movie are fictional, fact based on 3 friends where one was killed and 2 of them survived, they were inspired by real-world experiences where the trio had survived the ordeal, as well as another incident where 3 friends had a similar experience where one lost his life, while the other 2 survived after climbing a tree and staying put for about 22 hours before they were eventually rescued. The Reef, 2010. And to end this list, I have to talk about one of my personal favorites, The Reef. Released in 2010, this Australian shark thriller opens with a compelling live stream that makes the entire film experience far more immersive than the faint-hearted would like, especially as it explores a shark attack on a capsized vessel in 1983. Some sources have identified Ray Boundy as the real-world inspiration behind the film, but the story is not linear and it keeps switching up the characters and circumstances to depict the horrors of being cornered by a great white shark. Admittedly, the original incident involved a tiger shark, so the film comes across as more of a loose retelling that follows the original crew's attempt at survival, while the plot centers around 5 friends' adventure as their boat hits an underwater reef and capsizes. While they attempt to swim to a nearby island for help, they soon find themselves being targeted by this magnificent great white shark, and this film will have you feeling as if you're right there with the crew as they fight against all odds to evade the beast. And with that, I have explored some of the most terrifying horror films inspired by true events, ranging from psychopathic serial killer inspired angst to supernatural incidents covered in The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and everything in between. While horror films are creepy enough as it is, something about knowing that they were actually inspired by someone's lived experiences takes them to a whole new level of scary. And I definitely will be sleeping with the lights on tonight after having discussed so many of them. But enough about me. I want to know your favorite picks from the list in the comments below, and if you have any other true horror-inspired movie recommendations. I eagerly look forward to your replies so I can add a few more spooky horrors to my never-ending list of horror must-watches.